Welcome to another edition of Real Talk on this Friday, January 26th, 2024. Now, it's been brought to my attention that the week before last, I actually gave out the wrong date. I said February. For some reason, I often do that. I don't know. Nonetheless, thank you for joining me tonight on this 92.5 WLSD The Vault.
Do that. I don't know.
And if you didn't know from the opening song coming in, that was from a little 1991 film entitled Showdown in Little Toyko. Now, Showdown in Little Toyko is a film that I do hold near and dear to my heart. And we'll get into that a little bit as we get into the show tonight. But it is going to be a fantastic show. And a little bit of a nostalgic show, which is kind of how this movie came to be in regards to being the last minute substitute of tonight. So before we get into the show, please go to all of our social media pages. That's the Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, and if you want to go to Instagram, please do that. The Other People's Show. Now, if you're not too familiar with Showdown in Little Toyko, you may not follow older, now looking back, it is, going on like 30 years old. This movie actually now, this is like a time warp back for me because I didn't realize this movie is 32 years old. And the movie talking about Showdown in Little Toyko, starring Dolph Lundgren and the late but great Brandon Lee. Now, this was Brandon Lee's first American film. He had done a couple of other films of different countries, but this was his first forte into American cinema. And before we get into the questions and answers that we have for everyone, let me give you a little bit of the synopsis for the movie, if you don't know. Now, it is a 1991 film, but it was released in 91, but it was actually filmed and in production in 1989. And by the score, it really does have that Lethal Weapon, Tango and Cash, mishmash partners score to it. It's got that late 80s ring, which I mean in the most charming way. So this is about two LA cops with opposing views on the best way to uphold the law. Is there any other kind? They have to work together to bring down the Yakuzawa. And that is a showdown in Little Toyko. Now, Brandon Lee plays the American with the Japanese upbringing, Johnny. And Dolph Lundgren plays the tough but yet sensitive cop, Kenner. Now this score right here that you're hearing, this is a theme that plays throughout. And it's by the magnificent, listen to his name on the way up here. It's Kerry, I don't want to really mess up his name, but Kerry Hakuika Tagawa. I'm not sure if that's the pronunciation. I'm sure it isn't. But you've seen him in... he typically plays a villain. He's in the Sean Connery, Wesley Snipes movie, Red Sun Rising. He might also be... I know him a lot from this, but he usually plays a villain. And the score fits him. It's kind of his score. Because anytime he's about to do something menacing or deadly that score happens to play. But this is directed by the director Mark L. Lester. He's known for maybe the Drew Barrymore movie Firestarter. Remember that, when she was just a kid? He was the director of that. He's the director of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Commando, which is about a one-man fighting machine trying to kill all the bad guys in order to save his daughter. But he's faced with a nemesis, a foe at the end that is just pathetic. Even his name, I can't think of his name. I'll spew it out later if I recall what his name is. But that's another show. And Mark L. Lester was also the director of the John Candy comedy Armed and Dangerous. I didn't know that. I didn't know that before this episode. So, and then he's the director of Showdown in Little Tokyo. And like I said, we the bad guy's name, but we also have Dolph Lundgren, Brandon Lee, and Tia Carrere in a role right before she broke out. Now, this was filmed in like 89, maybe 90. But she broke out, if you remember, in Wayne's World. She was Wayne's love interest. And then a couple of years later, she was the villainess. Yeah, I think villainess in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie True Lies. And then after that, she kind of did a few movies here and there, but kind of fell off and ended up in like a B movie, straight to DVD or VOD career, which is fine. That's the career I have, which is fine by me. I don't mind that at all. But she's had a good career as well. So let's get into a little bit of the facts of Showdown in Little Tokyo. Now, this movie wasn't originally, it was originally a 90-minute film. Mark Lester turned in a 90-minute film, which is like a standard time for an action movie. But Warner Brothers disliked the movie so much that they trimmed 11 minutes off, and this movie is only 79 minutes. It's a quick movie. And I rewatched it earlier today, which is the weird thing. I'm going to circle back around to what I said at the beginning of the show, how this movie came about tonight. Originally planned the Mothman Prophecies. We're going to reschedule that. So I just happened earlier today, I was like, let's watch Showdown in Little Tokyo. I'd been feeling a little nostalgic, I guess, over this past week. It could have been a little bit of the snow, but I started revisiting, some past films, and this was one of those past films that actually had a big influence on my life and my movie watching experience, and how I kind of went down this genre of film anyway. Now, from a young age, I'll just go quickly, I was always intrigued, always knew that I wanted to do, acting and directing and creating and things such as that nature, even at a young age doing that. So I chronicled back through one of my first films watching in the theater, and it happened to be, I think, looking back, it's either Little Shop of Horrors with Rick Moranis and Steve Martin, the Audrey 2, or it is Inner Space. I'm not 100% sure which one it is. So it's one of those two. Which leads me to, there's some sporadic movie watching over the 80s. But in the 90s, I kind of came into my own as a film enthusiast, I guess I could say. And this genre of film, my friend Josh, at a young age, we would watch a lot of Van Damme movies. He introduced me to Van Damme through, I think it was Cyborg, and then we watched Lionheart and Bloodsport, Kickboxer, and then we saw Double Impact in the theater, Cobra Theater. The small auditorium. It's the furthest one on the right, if you remember back that far, is where we saw the double impact. So I was becoming intrigued and having an interest in this action, martial art type films. You had Jeff Speakman with A Perfect Weapon. You had Seagal, who had Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, Under Siege, even On Deadly Ground, Fire Down Below, The Glimmer Man, so on and so forth. And they all kind of faded out. But this was in the heyday of '91, so these kind of movies were making money, cheap to produce, cheap to distribute and get out to the world, and often had a great, a small but profit, always profitable, as you'll see with this film as well. So Dolph Lundgren was coming off of Rocky IV, which had been a success. He was the main villain, Ivan, in that. And he had a flop the next year as one of his first major leading man roles in He-Man. Now, He-Man was a flop, but it made money. Well, let me rephrase that. It was a flop, but it made enough money to be like, had the budget been trimmed a little bit, this would have been possibly a franchise. So it wasn't a huge financial flop, and over the years, obviously, it's gained a cult following and made its money back as well. That also, He-Man also features a very cute Courtney Cox, kind of in the dancing, Dancing in the Dark video, kind of that era, Courtney Cox. So Dolph Lundgren went from He-Man, and he did the Punisher. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but Dolph Lundgren was one of the first incarnations of the Punisher. That was the first version of the movie The Punisher that I had seen, and it was a little bit of a disappointment, and a lot of it was due to the fact that he didn't have the skull on his shirt during the movie. That didn't bother me. What bothered me in The Punisher was the fact that the plot wasn't a good plot. And all those school kids that, they've taken, I guess, I can't recall. They're going to kill the school kids of the wealthy for some particular reason. I can't really remember. But regardless of that, that's kind of where Dolph Lundgren was at this point. So here we go with Showdown in Little Tokyo. Like I said, this was going to break Brandon Lee into the action cinema in America. That was the design, and it's Dolph Lundgren is the headliner, and they're kind of co-headlining, I guess. And those of you that don't know, Brandon Lee is the son of the late Bruce Lee, who also tragically died while making a film, as did Brandon Lee. After he had Showdown in Little Tokyo, Rapid Fire, and The Crow. And to be honest with you, I was able to see 2 of the 3 theatrical release American movies of Brandon Lee. So I never really thought about that until just now. Anyway, I digress. Now, that being said, Showdown in Little Tokyo was, like I said, supposed to be 90 minutes. Basically, your standard time for your standard martial art action movies in the 90s, on average. Often they would run too much, but test audiences and Warner Brothers did not like the cut of this, so they trimmed it down, and they only played this movie in 140 screens. A lot of movies at that time were playing in 1,500 screens, even 2,000 screens, 2,100. So this got a very limited release, so it wasn't accessible to a lot of the public. Probably when they used to do this, and they still do it now to a certain extent, but what they'll do is they'll have the movies released like in New York, LA, and then they'll platform them out to smaller cities, and if they do well enough, they'll go ahead and release them to the mainstream public. Now, this is not the kind of movie that typically happens to, because this is not an independent production. This was an $8 million production. And on those 140 screens, it only brought in $2.2 million. So theatrically, it was a financial flop. However, it was on, HBO and the video stores. It was a big rental. So it obtained this cult following and ended up making a profit. And especially a few years later, when Brandon Lee did pass away, a lot of people that were interested, wow, this was a sad moment. What other works, was he involved in? They went back and revisited this in his catalog, which boosted the sales even more. Now, there are a couple of crazy edits, and it had to have been in-studio editors, not anyone that was really, loved the material, because obviously Warner Brothers did not. They've only released it in the DVD that I have. I'm not even sure about Blu-ray. But there's one part, and it's a blooper, honestly. This guy, he has betrayed the Yakuza, and he's about to be crushed between. He's like in a I guess like a dumping ground, and he's about to be crushed in a car between these two, huge, compact crushers. So as he's yelling, screaming, "No!" Yelling as loud as he can, it shows a picture of a dummy just sitting in his spot in the car that's actually getting crushed. But it's a dummy that the face has the mouth open, but it's not even a person. And that's actually in this scene. Now, by me telling you a few of the bloopers and goofs, I don't want to discourage you from going and checking it out, because it is worth a watch, especially if you like this kind of buddy action. It's got some one-liners. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And if you take it that way, this is a movie where the bullets continue to shoot even after the clip should be empty. So if you go in knowing it's going to be this kind of a film, you'll be able to sit back and enjoy it. But there's another little goof in the film where near the beginning, and I'm giving away spoilers, so it doesn't matter. This movie's 32 years old. You've had time to watch it. It's streaming somewhere now. I've looked it up, but I just happen to have the DVD as well. So near the beginning of the film, Dolph Lundgren as Kenner is he's breaking up this illegal kickboxing match, is what it seems to be. And the fight ends up going out into the street. A gun battle occurs, and the gang members get inside their 57 Chevys, whatever vehicle they have. It's an old Cadillac, I think. I'm not sure what it is, but it's convertible. Coming right at Kenner. Kenner jumps as the car is going underneath him, and he clears the car. But if you look closely, you can see the trampoline, the little trampoline that he actually jumps on to jump over the car. Now, it is impressive because he does jump over the car. But you can see, keep it out of the shot, just like in Napoleon Dynamite when they're doing the bike ramp. Now, I'm sure it's fixed now in the DVD, but the theatrical release, you could actually see the microphone if you framed it down far enough. Because someone in the seat one time, the audience, came and complained to the projectionist, which was me at the time, that you could see the microphone. And lo and behold, you could. But this has a lot of little goofs like that. There's a couple different goofs. A guy that ends up, a guy that commits suicide early in the film, later appears as the gang is together, which is a continuity error because obviously they didn't film it in sequence, but they didn't have anyone to pay really close attention to what was going on screen. Oh, this guy died in Act 1. He can't be in the middle of Act 2. That's just not going to happen. It does here, folks. It does here. Logic steps out the door, but fun steps in the door, and it is a fun film. Now, all the swords that were used in the movie were replicas. Excuse me. Your mouth gets kind of dry when you do a show. a replica. But all of them were replicas, except one that Kenner uses when he is slicing some bamboo in half. That was an authentic samurai sword. So let's get into a little bit of the... Oh yeah, here's this. I did go back, and although Rotten Tomatoes didn't exist at this time, the score on there now says 33% and audience score 51. So going by those scores, you might not think the movie is something that you would want to check out, but believe me, it is a fun movie. And it's a mindless movie because it's like action. The whole movie is almost, it goes from one action scene to the other action scene. So if they added 11 minutes, just 11 minutes, there may have been a little bit more character development and things of this nature, and flesh it out a little bit more. But it doesn't do that. It's not edited that way. So it's pretty much action scene after action scene, setup action scene. And I think between, to be honest with you, I think there's only a few minutes between each set action scene. You know what I mean? I really do. I don't think there's more than a few minutes that goes by where it's not like that, which is fine because that's what it sets out to do. And I would like to see the 11 minutes, what they would consist of. But I guess we'll never know. Unless they happen to release it. But, 32 years, they've not released anything else. I don't think they're going to. So, I don't know if there's any other things on YouTube, some released footage that I've not seen. I've not really done that much research on it. I'm just thinking of it as I'm now sitting here talking about it, to be honest. And on IMDb, Internet Movie Database, probably one of my most visited apps per day. I would say 65%, to be honest with you. So let's get into the plot and the story. Like I said, you have these two mismatched cops. Kenner, who has had multiple partners, and Johnny, who has had multiple partners as well. They'd rather work alone, but they keep, as Johnny's coming in, good luck, man, best wishes. I feel sorry for you. Everyone is saying these little, things to him as they're meeting, and they don't really get a chance to meet. Actually, to be honest with you, that's not actually how they meet. To be honest, that's the first time they actually meet inside the precinct. How they actually meet happens to also be an action scene. And then, pretty much, they're on the trail of the bad guys within, the next 6 or 7 minutes. And they form this kind of wise-cracking, not quite Murtaugh and Riggs, because there's not really an age difference in these guys. Maybe Brandon Lee as Johnny a little bit younger than the seasoned Dolph Lundgren, Kenner. But Kenner is more of a, samurai in everything that he believes in. The lifestyle of that. The balance of that. Whereas Johnny is, his dad's a dentist. He knows about, malls. He knows about MTV, things of this nature. Whereas Kenner, is a very disciplined guy. Very disciplined person. But they're both cops, and they both study the martial art, and they become reluctant friends. But they're only reluctant friends for, 7 minutes, maybe. It's a quick-paced film. So they pretty much, it goes from one set piece to the other. And I don't want to go through every little detail about it, because I want you to go and enjoy it and watch it. And please do. Please comment below or message me afterwards and tell me what you think or what you've thought about it if you've watched this movie in the past as well. But, the plot of the story, they're chasing the bad guys. The bad guys, get the upper hand for a moment, think that they're dead, kind of like how they do in Lethal Weapon. If you remember, in Lethal Weapon, which is, a fantastic buddy cop action movie, in the third act, which starts the third act, I do believe, is when Mr. Joshua not accidentally, but he shoots Riggs. And they think they've killed Riggs. So that's kind of what happens here. Kenner and Johnny get captured. The bad guys think that they've been crushed in the contraption I was talking about earlier at the dump site. And so therefore they're lying low, and then they're going to infiltrate the bad guys' brewery, is what it is, because they've taken over the people that had owned it before, and now they're not only going to sell the product, they're going to distribute. I think it's ice is what they call it in the film. I do believe. I might be wrong. But yeah, so that's basically the premise. And there's some gun battles and martial arts battles throughout the movie. But when I was younger, at my friend JL's house, which I actually spoke to him on the phone just a few days ago, oddly enough, there was a cassette tape, not cassette, but a VHS tape. And I've spoke of this tape, once or twice on the show. And this tape had scenes, just random scenes that were recorded on it. Certain scenes from just one of the guys. If you remember, where Terry goes undercover as a reporter, because she thinks she got passed over because she was a female. So she's like, well, if I write a newsworthy, a great story as a guy, I will, be able to win the prize or whatever she's trying to win. So there was a scene in that was on the VHS. There are a few scenes in Showdown in Little Toyko that were on a VHS tape. And I'm trying to remember what else was on there. And there were some action scenes happened to be mixed in as well. But these scenes involved intrigue that a younger, 13 or 14-year-old might enjoy. Well, I guess anyone of any age would enjoy, to be honest with you, now knowing what I know as an adult. But that made me want to seek out Showdown in Little Toyko. And there used to be Food City. Actually, it was Piggly Wiggly at the time, where I think if you're in the local area, there is a furniture store there now. But I think it had already changed to Food City, perhaps. Indeed, it may have. I'm not sure. Regardless, they used to rent DVDs in there. And one of the DVDs that they happened to have was Showdown in Little Toyko. And Showdown in Little Toyko on Mondays and Tuesdays, I do believe, was only $1. I think all movies on certain days were, $1. And that's when I happened to rent this movie over and over and over again. And as I was watching it today, I was doing some work around the apartment. I'll talk about that a little bit in the other people's show. But as I was doing some work around the apartment, I went ahead and put on the Showdown in Little Toyko. And as it was playing, I was very surprised how much of the movie that I could actually quote of the movie. Quite a bit of the movie. I'd say I could probably quote half the movie, which led me to think back, how many times have I actually seen this movie? I don't know. I would say, though, analyzing and thinking back and honestly counting as many times as I think that I could remember, I've actually seen Showdown in Little Toyko probably 20 times. And I think it's one of the most watched movies that I know. But I think one reason, because it's such a fast-paced movie and it's short. I never had paid attention to really how short that it was. Let's get into the characters. Like I said, we have Kenner, Johnny, Minko is Tia Carrere, and then we have the main bad guy, Carrie, Yukazawa. I think they're all great characters. I mean, they're the motivation for the characters is pretty much. Here's another little tidbit. Yukazawa also killed Kenner's mother and father when he was a kid. Now, I don't know how old Kenner is supposed to be, but in the flashback, he looks to be maybe about 7. So 20 years goes by, and so that would make him 27 to 30. Brandon Lee at that time was probably, mid 25, 26, 27 maybe. So I guess the age fits. But that's it just happens to be a coincidence that the gang member that they're looking for is the leader, is the man who killed Kenner's father and mother when he was younger. So that's a nice little personal vendetta, kind of fueling the plot, fueling Kenner and Johnny. But Johnny wants to do this by the book. He wants to obey the law, do this by the book, and try to arrest these people. Just like Murtaugh says to Riggs. Just shoot him in the leg. Also, John Connor asked the Terminator not to kill anyone also. So it's it's kind of a trope that they use, but it's used in a good way, in a fun way here. Tia Carrere, she doesn't really have, she's more of the damsel in distress, but she does, basically she is the damsel in distress. But that's the role that she knew she was going to take. She knew the role of the character within the film, and she was paying her dues and working her way up, and she does a great job. But I will tell you this, and I learned this: there are some quote nude scenes with her in the movie, but it was a body double. It wasn't her, and I only learned that upon a couple years ago. But when I was younger, obviously you would never know that unless you happen to hear her talk about it or read an article, because the internet wasn't as widely available as it is now, obviously. Favorite, least favorite scene. This is going to be a tough one. I can't think of a scene that I don't really like, to be honest with you. I mean, there's a scene where one of the henchmen he is pretty much saying that I've disappointed you, I've been disloyal, so he cuts off his pinky, which I can relate. I don't have half a pinky. Anyway, he cuts off his pinky, offers it up, and then Carrie is just like, that's it? That is all? And then Carrie stabs the guy. He's ruthless. He chops off women's heads with the sword. He kills his henchman. He chops off another guy's arm. Actually, when they first take over the brewery, one of the people that are buying product, he's like, the product is going to be going up 20%. And this guy is kind of like leaning his arm, leaning up against the wall. And then Carrie pulls out the samurai sword, and which is a replica, remember, from earlier. Pulls out the samurai sword, chops his arm off. So there's a lot of arm chopping and limb chopping happening in this film as well. But that's a good scene. The scene where Tia Carrere is, she's been dishonored by Carrie, and Johnny and Kenner are just going into the house and going to get her out, break her out. Actually, Kenner does by himself. He breaks in, kills about 5 or 6 henchmen, carries her out as being fired at. It's a good action scene, unbelievable. But he's also he's so strong. Not only can he jump over cars, he's able to push a car and turn it up on its side, and then shoots it, and it blows up as they go away. So it's got a lot of fun little scenes, and it just action set piece. There's a fight when they're in the bathhouse, and there's like water hose stuck in a guy's mouth, and he dies that way, and a lot of martial arts in that scene as well. Gun battle as well. The score and the music, we've kind of been dabbling and listening to a little bit of the score in the music. This is a really great one. Very sinister, mysterious, lurking. But it's got that 80s, late 80s, early 90s feel to it, which gives it that bit of nostalgia. And I think it's fitting. I really like it. I think it's good. And that's by David Michael Frank. Showdown in Little Toyko soundtrack. Originality, this is not that an original movie. It's not very original at all. I'm not going into this movie. On the cover art it's got Kenner doing kind of like a samurai pose, shirtless. Brandon Lee in the background doing his martial arts stance, and then the tattooed chest of the villain. That's basically the cover. So I'm not going into this movie thinking it's going to be original. But I'm going into this movie thinking it's going to be fun. Thinking it's going to be not a waste of my time. Because not only do I judge movies and rate them on their merit, a lot of the criteria that I go over tonight, with you. But I also say, was this worth my time? Was this worth 79 minutes of my day? Yes, it is. Because I know a lot of people waste time. Everyone does. I try not to, but I do sometimes. And most people do. So if you're going to want a fun night, and you want a good action, good I use loosely, fun martial art movie, Showdown in Little Toyko could be it. Poster, I pretty much described the poster. Now, there was a poster that I found also, and the image of Brandon Lee in his martial artist pose is him in like a button-down shirt and tie. So I don't. That might have been fan made. I don't know, but that is not the original poster. Would I recommend this film? Yes or no? I think you can tell just by me talking about the film that it is a fun film. You're going to go into it not expecting the acting in this film, considering it's an $8 million action film that was barely released, and there's a lot of several goofs in it. It's not bad. If you're going into it expecting high art, expecting something that would change the way you think of an action film, it's not going to be that. But it is not a bad way to spend 79 minutes, and it's a fun way to look back on the roles that Brandon Lee could have been. He was only in, I'm talking about American films, Showdown in Little Toyko, Rapid Fire, and The Crow. And we've already covered The Crow. And I've never really heard anybody in my life actually talk about watching Rapid Fire. But I do remember watching it as a 14-year-old kid, thinking this guy is going to be the next great martial artist. It said, move over Van Damme, Seagal, Brandon Lee has arrived. That's what the ads would say on TV. And I think that would have been true as well. And a lot of people don't know this about Dolph Lundgren. They might think he's just like a musclehead. But he is actually a very intelligent person. with a very, very high IQ. And I think he's like I think he was a chemical engineer. Is what I there was a couple things I read, a couple of videos I watched, and it said such. So going by that, yes, I think so. So yeah, I do think this is a movie that you will enjoy if you like this type of movie. If you don't like Van Damme, Seagal, Jeff Speakman, you got Brandon Lee, Dolph Lundgren, Stallone, Schwarzenegger. If you don't really care for those type films, you probably won't like that. Or, the buddy cop like Murtaugh and Riggs. But if you enjoy that, you're going to enjoy this film. And I suggest check it out, rent it. I think it's free. It might be free somewhere. But I'll say it's worth $2.99. I think that's what I would pay if I didn't own it, $2.99. So that's my little, discussion of Showdown in Little Tokyo. Thank you for tuning in. As always, please go to our social media pages. That is the Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, and Instagram. Thank you for listening on 92.5 WLSD, The Vault, AM 1220, WLSDradio.com, and stay tuned for the Other People Show in just a moment.